The morning sun cast long shadows across the courtyard of Buckingham Palace, but inside the private quarters, darkness seemed to linger. Catherine, the Princess of Wales, stood before the ornate mirror in her dressing room, her reflection showing the weight of sleepless nights. Her usually bright eyes appeared dim, and her hands trembled slightly as she reached for her pearl earrings, the same ones Queen Elizabeth had gifted her on her wedding day. Prince William paced the adjoining room, his military bearing unable to mask the emotional turmoil brewing within. The phone calls had been coming in all morning from palace officials, government ministers, and family members. Each conversation brought the same inevitable reality closer to home. Today would mark the beginning of a farewell that no one in the royal family had wanted to face. The couple had been married for over a decade, weathering storms that would have broken lesser partnerships. They had stood together through scandals, family feuds, and the intense scrutiny that comes with being the future King and Queen of England. But this morning something was different. The air between them crackled with unspoken words and suppressed emotions. Catherine finally turned from the mirror, her composure as carefully constructed as her appearance. She had learned early in her royal journey that showing vulnerability in public was a luxury she could rarely afford. Yet today, even her practiced smile seemed to falter at the edges. William stopped his pacing when he saw her, and for a moment, they simply looked at each other across the room that had witnessed so many of their private moments. The decision they faced wasn't one that appeared in any royal protocol handbook. It wasn't about state visits, charitable obligations, or even family disputes. This was about something far more personal and infinitely more painful. The medical reports lay scattered across William's desk, each page containing words that seemed to grow heavier each time they were read. Catherine's diagnosis had come as a shock to everyone, including the royal physicians who had been monitoring her health for months. What had started as routine checkups following her successful completion of chemotherapy had revealed something unexpected. The cancer had returned, but this time, the prognosis carried implications that extended far beyond her personal health. The treatment options were limited, and each carried risks that could affect not just Catherine personally, but her ability to fulfill her royal duties. More importantly, there were considerations about her role as a mother to George,
Charlotte, and Louis. The children, now old enough to understand the gravity of serious conversations,
had been shielded from the worst of the news, but Catherine and William knew that wouldn't be possible for much longer. As William approached his wife, he could see the internal battle she was fighting. Catherine had always been the steady one, the rock that anchored their family through every storm. She had transformed from a commoner into one of the most beloved members of the royal family through sheer determination and grace. But now, faced with uncertainty about her future, even her legendary strength seemed to waver. The palace staff moved quietly through the corridors outside, their usual efficiency tinged with an atmosphere of solemnity. Word had begun to spread, despite the family's attempts at discretion. The household staff, many of whom had served the royal family for decades, recognized the signs of a family in crisis. William reached out and took Catherine's hand, feeling the familiar comfort of her touch, but also noticing how much weight she had lost in recent weeks. The chemotherapy had taken its toll, but she had borne it with characteristic dignity. Now, as they faced the possibility of more aggressive treatment, both knew that the coming months would test their marriage, their family, and their commitment to the crown in ways they had never imagined. Outside, the world continued its normal pace, unaware that inside the palace walls, a conversation was about to take place that would change everything. The British public, who had watched Catherine bloom from a shy university student into a confident princess, had no idea that their beloved future queen was facing the fight of her life. Catherine squeezed William's hand, drawing strength from the connection that had sustained them through everything. She knew that whatever decision they made in the coming hours would ripple far beyond their family, affecting the monarchy itself and the millions of people who looked to them for stability and hope. The children's laughter echoed from the garden where they played with their nanny, blissfully unaware of the storm gathering inside the palace. Catherine watched them through the tall windows, memorizing every detail of their carefree movements. George, now old enough to understand royal protocol, still maintained the innocent joy of childhood when he thought no cameras were watching. Charlotte's spirited personality shone through as she commanded her younger brother Louis in some elaborate game of their own creation. William joined Catherine at the window, both parents drawing comfort from watching their children's happiness. They had worked so hard to give George, Charlotte, and Louis as normal a childhood as possible within the confines of royal life. Birthday parties with school friends, family holidays away from the public eye, and quiet evenings at home had been their gifts to their children. But normalcy was about to become a luxury they could no longer afford. The treatment protocol recommended by the medical team would require Catherine to spend extended periods in the hospital, followed by months of recovery that might leave her too weak to fulfill even basic parental duties. The thought of missing bedtime stories, school plays, and family dinners felt like a different kind of death to Catherine. Dr. Harrison, the royal physician who had become almost like family over the past year, arrived for the private consultation they had scheduled. His gentle demeanor had been a source of comfort during Catherine's initial treatment, but today his expression carried the gravity of someone bearing difficult news. The three of them sat in William's private study, surrounded by centuries of royal history. Portraits of past monarchs looked down from the walls, silent witnesses to the weight of duty that had been passed down through generations. Catherine found herself wondering how many of these previous royals had faced similar impossible choices between personal survival and public service. Dr. Harrison spread the latest test results across the mahogany desk, his voice steady but compassionate as he explained the options. The experimental treatment offered in Switzerland showed promising results, but it would require Catherine to be away from England for at least 6 months. The alternative treatments available in London were less invasive but carried significantly lower success rates. William's jaw tightened as he absorbed the implications. 6 months away would mean missing George's school sports day, Charlotte's first school play, and Louis's 5th birthday. It would mean leaving William to handle the increasing royal duties alone, while managing 3 young children and the constant media scrutiny that followed their every move. More significantly, it would mean stepping back from the charitable work that had become Catherine's passion. The early years foundation, the mental health initiatives, and the photography projects that had allowed her to connect with people across the Commonwealth would all have to be put on hold. For someone who had found her purpose in service, this felt like losing a part of her identity. Catherine asked the questions that had been keeping her awake at night. Would the children understand why Mummy had to go away? How would they explain her absence to the public without causing panic about the future of the monarchy? What would happen to the carefully planned tour of Australia that had been scheduled for the following spring? The discussion continued for hours, with phone calls to specialists in 3 different countries. Each conversation added new layers of complexity to an already impossible decision. The king, William's father, had been briefed on the situation and had made it clear that Catherine's health must be the top priority, regardless of the impact on royal duties. But Catherine struggled with the weight of responsibility she felt toward the British people. Letters arrived daily from families facing their own health crises, drawing strength from her example. Young girls looked up to her as a role model of grace under pressure. The thought of disappointing them, even for the sake of her own survival, felt like betraying a sacred trust. As evening approached, William dismissed Dr. Harrison and the other advisors, insisting that he and Catherine needed time alone to process everything. The couple sat together on the sofa where they had spent countless evenings discussing everything, from state matters to their children's homework. Catherine leaned against William's shoulder, feeling the steady rhythm of his breathing. For a moment, they weren't the Prince and Princess of Wales, future king and queen. They were simply a husband and wife facing the most difficult decision of their marriage. The weight of the crown felt heavier than ever, but so did the love that had sustained them through everything else. The evening news played softly in the background, showing footage of their recent public appearances. Catherine watched herself waving to crowds, cutting ribbons and delivering speeches, wondering if those images would become the last memories the public would have of her in her prime. The decision came at dawn, not through lengthy deliberations but in a moment of clarity as Catherine watched her children sleep. She had spent the night moving quietly between their bedrooms, studying their peaceful faces in the early morning light. George had thrown off his covers just as William used to do as a child. Charlotte clutched her favorite stuffed animal, and Louis had somehow managed to sleep sideways across his small bed. Standing in Louis's doorway, Catherine realized that her choice had already been made. These 3 innocent souls needed their mother, But they needed her alive and fighting, not martyring herself for the sake of royal duty. The monarchy had survived far greater challenges than a princess taking time to save her own life. William found her in the kitchen, making tea with hands that shook only slightly. He didn't need to ask what she had decided. He could see it in her posture, in the way she moved with new purpose despite her obvious exhaustion. They had been together long enough that words often became unnecessary. The calls began immediately. First to the king, who received the news with the quiet dignity that had carried him through his own battles with cancer. His voice cracked only once, when he told Catherine that she had his complete support, and that the family would rally around William and the children during her absence. Next came the call to Catherine's parents, Michael and Carol Middleton. Her mother's tears were audible through the phone, but her voice remained strong as she promised to help with the children in any way needed. Her father, ever practical, was already making plans to clear his schedule and be available for school pickups and bedtime routines. The palace communications team was briefed next, their years of experience in managing royal crises put to the ultimate test. The statement would need to be carefully crafted to convey the seriousness of the situation without causing panic. The British public had invested so much hope in Catherine as their future queen. The announcement of her extended treatment would send shockwaves through the Commonwealth. But first, before any public announcements, came the most difficult conversation of all. Catherine and William sat down with George, Charlotte and Louis in the family sitting room, the same space where they had explained the death of their great-grandmother, Queen Elizabeth. George, at 11, understood more than his parents sometimes wished he did. His questions were direct and mature, showing the early signs of the future king he would one day become. Why couldn't the doctors in London help Mummy? How long was 6 months, really? Would she be able to call them every day? Charlotte, with the emotional intelligence that had always amazed her parents, seemed to grasp the gravity of the situation even at 9 years old. Her concern wasn't just for her mother, but for her father too. She had noticed how tired Daddy looked lately, how his smiles didn't quite reach his eyes anymore. Louis, still only 4, struggled to understand why Mummy needed to go to the hospital for so long when she seemed fine right now. His innocent questions about whether she would miss Christmas and his birthday party broke Catherine's heart in ways that no medical diagnosis could. The family spent the day together, deliberately avoiding phones and official duties. They walked through the gardens, played board games, and had an impromptu picnic on the lawn. Catherine found herself memorizing every moment, the way Charlotte wrinkled her nose when she laughed, how George unconsciously mimicked his father's mannerisms, and Louis's infectious giggle when William chased him around the garden. As evening approached, the weight of what lay ahead became impossible to ignore. Catherine would leave for Switzerland in 3 days, giving her just enough time to record video messages for important events she would miss, and to ensure all her charitable commitments were properly transitioned to other family members. The packing began that night, a surreal process that felt like preparing for an extended holiday while knowing it was anything but. Catherine carefully selected photos of the children, William's letters from their early courtship days, and small mementos that would help her feel connected to home during the darkest moments of treatment. William helped in silence, his own way of processing the impending separation. He folded her favorite sweaters, knowing that in a few days he would be sleeping alone in their bed for the first time since their honeymoon. The man who had been trained from birth to lead a nation felt completely unprepared for leading his family through this crisis. The children insisted on helping, turning the task into something almost celebratory, rather than mournful. They drew pictures for Mummy's hospital room, selected books they thought she might enjoy, and carefully wrapped small gifts for her to open when she felt sad. That final evening together, the family maintained their usual routines with deliberate normalcy. Dinner at 6, baths for the younger ones, and bedtime stories read in voices that remained steady despite the emotion underneath. Catherine tucked each child in, whispering promises to call every morning and reminders of how much she loved them. Later, as she and William lay in bed, neither sleeping, they talked about everything and nothing. They made plans for daily video calls, discussed how he would handle the children's questions when she wasn't there to help answer them, and promised each other that this separation would not define their marriage but strengthen it. The morning of Catherine's departure arrived with an unseasonable chill. that seemed to mirror the heaviness in everyone's hearts. The private jet sat waiting on the tarmac at RAF Northolt, its presence both a symbol of privilege and a stark reminder of the medical emergency that necessitated this journey. Catherine dressed with particular care that morning, choosing a navy blue coat that had become synonymous with her public appearances. She wanted the children to remember her looking strong and composed, not as the fragile patient she felt inside. Her hair was styled perfectly, her makeup flawless, maintaining the image of royal dignity even in her most vulnerable moment. The children had been allowed to miss school for the send-off, a decision that spoke to the gravity of the situation. George wore his best suit, understanding instinctively that this was a formal occasion despite taking place within their home. Charlotte had chosen her favorite dress, the blue one that matched her mother's coat, while Louis clung to a stuffed animal that Catherine had given him the night before. Breakfast was a quiet affair, with everyone trying too hard to maintain normal conversation. William read snippets from the morning papers, carefully avoiding the growing speculation about Catherine's health that had begun appearing in the tabloids. The palace's official statement wouldn't be released until after Catherine's safe arrival in Switzerland, but the British media had developed a sixth sense for royal family crises. The drive to the airfield was made in their private car, with William at the wheel and Catherine beside him, their hands intertwined across the console. The children chattered in the back seat, their voices a welcome distraction from the weight of the moment. Charlotte pointed out landmarks along the familiar route, while George asked practical questions about the flight time and Swiss time zones. At the airfield, the goodbye scene played out with all the complexity of a family trying to be brave for each other. Catherine knelt down to Louis's level first, holding him close as he wrapped his small arms around her neck. She whispered silly jokes in his ear, making him giggle despite his obvious confusion about why Mummy was leaving. Charlotte's farewell was more composed, but no less emotional. The 9-year-old had prepared a small jewelry box filled with her own treasures for her mother to take to Switzerland. Inside were friendship bracelets, a special coin from their last family holiday, and a photo of the whole family taken just weeks earlier when everything still felt normal. George, struggling with his role as the eldest and future heir, shook hands formally with his mother before dissolving into tears and hugging her tightly. Catherine held him, feeling the weight of his shoulders and realizing how much he had grown in just the past year. She whispered reminders about helping Daddy and being kind to his siblings, watching him straighten with the burden of premature responsibility. William's goodbye was the most difficult to witness. The couple who had weathered so many storms together stood apart from the children, having their own private moment. They had already said their deepest goodbyes in the privacy of their bedroom, but this public farewell carried its own weight. Catherine touched his face gently, memorizing the feel of his skin and the way his eyes crinkled when he tried to smile. Through worry, the medical team accompanying Catherine included Dr. Harrison and a specialist nurse who would oversee her care during the flight and initial hospital admission. Their presence added a clinical reality to what might otherwise have felt like an elaborate family trip. As Catherine climbed the steps to the aircraft, she turned back once to wave at her family standing on the tarmac. The image would later be described by royal photographers as heartbreaking in its quiet dignity. William held Louis in his arms while George and Charlotte stood beside him, all four of them waving until the plane door closed. The flight to Switzerland passed in a blur of medical consultations, phone calls to confirm treatment protocols, and quiet moments staring out the window at the changing landscape below. Catherine found herself thinking about all the other royal flights she had taken: glamorous state visits, romantic getaways with William, family holidays with the children. This journey felt different from all of them, carrying the weight of uncertainty rather than anticipation. Landing in Zurich, Catherine was met by the clinic's director and a security team that would ensure her privacy during treatment. The Swiss facility was renowned for its discretion as much as its medical expertise, having treated royalty and world leaders for decades without a single breach of confidentiality. The clinic room assigned to Catherine was surprisingly warm and homelike, with views of the surrounding mountains and space for the personal items she had brought from England. The children's drawings were immediately hung on the walls, and William's photo took pride of place on the bedside table. That first evening, as scheduled, Catherine called home for what would become a nightly ritual. The children fought good-naturedly over who would speak to Mummy first, their voices providing the connection she desperately needed. William saved his conversation for last, speaking quietly after the children had gone to bed, sharing details about their day and his own struggles with single parenting. The first treatment session was scheduled for the following morning, beginning a protocol that would test Catherine's physical and emotional strength in ways she couldn't yet imagine. But surrounded by her family's love, even from a distance, and supported by world-class medical care, she felt ready to begin the fight for her life. 3 weeks into Catherine's treatment, the palace released their carefully crafted statement to the world. The news broke during the morning hours in London, sending shockwaves through the British media and public. The statement was brief but honest, explaining that the Princess of Wales was receiving specialized treatment abroad and requesting privacy for the family during this difficult time. The public reaction was immediate and overwhelming. Flowers began appearing at the gates of Buckingham Palace within hours, growing into a carpet of color that stretched along the entire perimeter. Messages of support poured in from around the world, from ordinary citizens to world leaders, all expressing their love and prayers for Catherine's recovery. Back in Switzerland, Catherine watched the news coverage from her hospital bed, alternating between gratitude for the public's support and concern about the intense media scrutiny surrounding her family. The treatment was taking its toll. She had lost more weight, her famous hair was thinning, and some days she barely had the energy to sit up for their evening family video calls. But there were also moments of unexpected joy. Fellow patients at the clinic, unaware of her identity initially, had welcomed her into their informal support network. She found comfort in conversations with a retired teacher from Germany, a young mother from Italy, and an elderly gentleman from France, all fighting their own battles with the same courage she was trying to muster. William, meanwhile, was navigating the challenges of single parenthood while maintaining a full schedule of royal duties. The king had taken on several of William's engagements, but many could only be handled by the future Prince of Wales himself. Mornings began at dawn with breakfast duty, getting 3 children ready for school, and ensuring their emotional needs were met before his own day of obligations began. George had become his father's unofficial helper, taking on responsibilities that seemed far too mature for an 11-year-old. He helped Charlotte with her homework, played with Louis when Daddy was on phone calls, and never complained about the disruption to their normal family life. But William noticed the way his eldest son's shoulders carried tension that belonged to adults, not children. Charlotte had thrown herself into creating care packages for her mother, spending hours drawing pictures, writing letters, and carefully selecting small gifts to send to Switzerland. Her creativity became a coping mechanism, transforming her worry into tangible expressions of love that could travel across the distance separating them. Louis struggled the most with his mother's absence. At 4 years old, he couldn't fully grasp why Mummy couldn't just come home if she was feeling sick. His bedtime routine became increasingly difficult, with tears and requests for Mummy that broke William's heart nightly. The stuffed animal Catherine had given him became his constant companion, worn thin from clutching and carrying. The nightly video calls became the anchor point of everyone's day. Despite her exhaustion, Catherine made sure to be available at the same time each evening, London time. She would ask about homework, school friends, funny things that happened during their day, and always ended each call with individual, "I love you" messages for each child. During her 4th week of treatment, Catherine faced a serious setback. The aggressive therapy caused complications that required emergency intervention, leaving her unconscious for 36 hours. The medical team worked around the clock. While in London, William kept vigil by his phone, ready to fly to Switzerland at a moment's notice. The children were shielded from the worst of their mother's medical crisis, but they sensed the heightened tension in their father's behavior. William's mother-in-law, Carol, moved into the palace temporarily to help maintain normalcy for the children, while William dealt with the medical emergency unfolding hundreds of miles away. When Catherine finally regained consciousness, her first request was to see her family. The video call that night was different from all the others. Her voice was weaker, but her determination seemed stronger. She apologized for scaring them and promised to fight harder than ever to come home. The incident marked a turning point in her treatment. The medical team adjusted her protocol, finding a balance between aggressive therapy and maintaining her quality of life. Catherine began participating in the clinic's rehabilitation programs, slowly rebuilding her physical strength while the medication worked to combat her illness. Letters continued pouring in from across the Commonwealth. School children sent drawings, elderly citizens shared their own recovery stories, and thousands of people lit candles in churches across Britain, creating a network of prayer and support that spanned continents. Catherine found particular comfort in letters from other mothers facing similar battles. Their words of encouragement, practical advice about managing treatment side effects, and honest acknowledgments of the fear that accompanied every medical appointment helped her feel less alone in her fight. The international media, initially respectful of the family's privacy request, began increasing their coverage as weeks stretched into months. Paparazzi photographers gathered near the Swiss clinic, hoping to catch glimpses of the princess during her rare outdoor walks. The security team worked tirelessly to maintain her privacy, but the pressure of constant scrutiny added another layer of stress to an already overwhelming situation. Despite everything, Catherine's spirits were bolstered by small victories. Her latest blood work showed improvement. She had managed to gain back some of the weight she had lost, and most importantly, her energy levels were slowly returning. The medical team expressed cautious optimism about her progress, though they emphasized that recovery would be a long and ongoing process. After 3 months in Switzerland, Catherine received the news she had been desperately hoping for. Her latest scan showed significant improvement, and the medical team felt confident enough to discuss a potential return to London for continued treatment. The experimental therapy had succeeded beyond their most optimistic projections, though full recovery would still require months of careful monitoring and follow-up care. The conversation about returning home sparked a complex mix of emotions. Catherine was overjoyed at the prospect of reuniting with her family, but she also felt apprehensive about stepping back into the intense spotlight of royal life. The woman who would return to London would be different from the one who had left, physically changed by treatment, emotionally transformed by facing her own mortality, and carrying new perspectives about what truly mattered in life. William received the call while reviewing homework with Charlotte and Louis at the kitchen table. His immediate reaction was pure relief, followed quickly by practical concerns about managing Catherine's continued treatment while resuming their public duties. The children, overhearing their father's excited voice, erupted in celebration before they even fully understood the news. The logistics of Catherine's return became a carefully orchestrated operation involving medical teams on 2 continents, security personnel, palace communications specialists, and family members eager to welcome her home. A specialized medical facility in London was prepared to continue her care, ensuring seamless transition from the Swiss clinic. But beyond the medical and logistical considerations, there was the emotional preparation required for a family reunion. After such an extended and traumatic separation, Catherine worried about how much the children had changed in her absence, while William wondered if their marriage would need time to readjust to being together. Again, after months of relating only through screens and phone calls, the children threw themselves into preparation for Mummy's homecoming with the same energy they had devoted to her care packages. Charlotte organized a welcome home party complete with handmade decorations. George practiced piano pieces he had learned during her absence, and Louis drew picture after picture of their family together again. Catherine's final week in Switzerland was bittersweet. She had formed genuine friendships with other patients and staff members who had supported her through the darkest moments of her treatment. The retired teacher from Germany had become like a surrogate mother, offering wisdom about facing uncertainty with grace. The young Italian mother had provided perspective about balancing family responsibilities with personal health needs. The clinic held a small, private celebration marking Catherine's successful treatment completion. Dr. Mueller, who had overseen her care, presented her with a small Swiss watch, inscribed with the date of her arrival and departure as a reminder of her strength during the most challenging months of her life. On her final evening in Switzerland, Catherine took a solitary walk through the clinic's gardens, reflecting on how profoundly she had changed during her stay. The woman who had arrived, terrified and uncertain, was leaving with a deeper understanding of her own resilience and a renewed appreciation for every ordinary moment with her family. The flight back to London felt entirely different from her journey to Switzerland. Where the earlier trip had been filled with fear and uncertainty, this homecoming carried hope and anticipation. The medical team accompanying her noted improvements in her energy, appetite, and overall demeanor that went far beyond what could be measured in blood tests and scans. William and the children waited at the private airfield, their excitement barely contained as the plane touched down. Louis held the stuffed animal Catherine had given him, now more cherished than ever. Charlotte clutched the jewelry box her mother had returned to her, filled with small treasures from Switzerland. George stood beside his father, trying to maintain royal composure while clearly struggling with overwhelming joy. When Catherine appeared at the top of the aircraft stairs, the family's emotional control finally cracked. She looked thinner than when she had left, her hair shorter and her complexion paler, but her smile was radiant with genuine happiness. The reunion on the tarmac was private but profound, with tears of joy replacing the tears of farewell that had marked her departure. Louis was the first to reach her, launching himself into her arms with the unconscious trust of a child who had never doubted his mother would return. Charlotte followed, chattering excitedly about everything she had planned for their first day back together. George approached more cautiously, his 11-year-old awareness of the gravity of the situation making him hesitant to fully celebrate until he was certain his mother was truly well. Catherine held each of her children, breathing in their familiar scents and marveling at how much they had grown in her absence. Louis seemed taller. Charlotte's face had lost some of its childhood roundness, and George carried himself with new maturity that spoke to the responsibilities he had shouldered during her treatment. William's embrace was the most emotional of all. The couple who had supported each other through everything from royal scandals to family tragedies had never been tested by such complete separation. As they held each other on the tarmac, both felt the profound relief of not just surviving their ordeal, but emerging from it with their love intact and perhaps even strengthened. The drive home to their residence was filled with animated conversation, as the children shared months' worth of stories, achievements, and small adventures. Catherine listened with wonder, realizing how much family life had continued and evolved even in her absence. William had clearly done an extraordinary job maintaining stability and nurturing their children's growth during what must have been an incredibly difficult period for him. Arriving home, Catherine was moved to discover that the staff had prepared a quiet welcome celebration. Fresh flowers filled every room. Her favorite tea was brewing in the kitchen, and dinner had been prepared featuring all the comfort foods she had missed during her months of hospital meals. The simple luxury of being surrounded by familiar objects, family photos, and the accumulated memories of their shared life felt almost overwhelming. That first evening back, the family established new routines that acknowledged both Catherine's ongoing recovery needs and their collective desire to return to normalcy. Dinner was earlier to accommodate her medication schedule. Bedtime stories were shared between both parents, and quiet time was built into the schedule for Catherine to rest when needed. The children, remarkably adaptable as children often are, quickly adjusted to having both parents home again, while remaining protective of their mother's health. They had learned during her absence to be more self-sufficient and considerate, qualities that served the family well as they navigated this new phase of recovery together. As Catherine tucked each child into bed that first night home, she was struck by the profound gratitude she felt for ordinary moments that had once seemed routine. Reading bedtime stories, answering questions about school, and kissing goodnight foreheads were privileges she would never again take for granted. The treatment had saved her life, but coming home had restored her joy in living it. 6 months after Catherine's return from Switzerland, the royal family faced the decision of when and how she would resume public duties. The successful treatment had eliminated the immediate threat to her health, but ongoing monitoring and maintenance therapy required careful balance with royal obligations. More importantly, Catherine herself had emerged from her ordeal with different priorities and a transformed perspective on service. The first public appearance was planned with meticulous care. Catherine would attend the annual Children's Charity Gala that had become one of her signature events, marking not just her return to public life, but her commitment to the causes that had always defined her royal identity. The event was scheduled for a crisp October evening, exactly 1 year since her initial diagnosis had first disrupted their lives. The weeks leading up to the gala were filled with preparation that went far beyond selecting an appropriate dress or reviewing briefing materials. Catherine worked with counselors to prepare for the emotional impact of returning to the spotlight, practiced responses to anticipated questions about her health, and most importantly, processed her own feelings about stepping back into a role that had once consumed so much of her energy. The children, now seasoned veterans of their mother's health journey, approached the gala with excitement and pride. George, Charlotte, and Louis had watched their mother fight for her life and emerge victorious, transforming their understanding of strength and resilience. They would not attend the evening event, but their presence at a small family celebration beforehand would provide Catherine with the emotional foundation she needed. William, who had shouldered enormous responsibility during Catherine's treatment, felt his own complex emotions about her return to public duties. He was proud of her recovery and eager to resume their partnership in royal responsibilities. But he was also protective of the hard-won peace their family had found during the quieter months of her convalescence. The dress Catherine chose for her return was symbolic in its simplicity. Rather than the elaborate gowns that had marked many of her previous formal appearances, she selected an elegant but understated design in royal blue, the color that had become associated with her strength throughout her health journey. Her jewelry was minimal, just her wedding rings and the small Swiss watch that had marked her treatment completion. Standing before the mirror on the evening of the gala, Catherine saw reflected back a woman who had been fundamentally changed by her experience. The physical changes were obvious. Her hair was still shorter, her face slightly thinner, her posture carrying new awareness of her body's vulnerability. But the deeper changes were in her eyes, which held both wisdom earned through suffering and gratitude for survival that radiated genuine warmth. The car ride to the venue was quiet, with William and Catherine holding hands as they approached the first moment when she would face the British public since announcing her illness. The crowds gathered outside the hotel were larger than expected, with people holding signs of support and flowers to mark her return. The outpouring of genuine affection from strangers who had followed her journey moved Catherine to tears before she even entered the building. Inside the gala, the moment Catherine appeared was electric. The entire room rose in spontaneous applause that lasted several minutes, with many attendees openly weeping at seeing their beloved princess not just alive, but radiant with renewed purpose. The ovation was not just for her return, but recognition of the courage she had shown throughout her ordeal. Catherine's speech that evening became one of the most memorable in recent royal history. Rather than simply thanking supporters and discussing charitable work, she spoke honestly about facing mortality, the importance of family, and how her illness had deepened her commitment to helping others facing similar challenges. Her words carried authenticity that only comes from personal experience with profound hardship. The success of the gala marked the beginning of Catherine's gradual return to public life, but with important changes. Her schedule was permanently reduced to allow for ongoing health monitoring and more family time. She became particularly involved in cancer research charities and support organizations for families dealing with serious illness, causes that now carried personal meaning beyond royal duty. More significantly, Catherine's experience had changed the entire royal family's approach to service and publicity. The months of uncertainty had reminded them that public duty, while important, should never come at the cost of family health and happiness. The children had learned to value time with their parents above all else, while William and Catherine had redefined their partnership around support and mutual care rather than simply shared obligations. The story that had begun with a devastating diagnosis and heartbreaking farewell had transformed into something unexpected, a testament to the power of love, medical expertise, and human resilience. Catherine's return to public life was not just a personal victory, but a moment of hope for countless families facing similar battles around the world. In the months that followed, letters continued pouring in from people inspired by Catherine's openness about her health journey. Her willingness to show vulnerability alongside strength had created a new model of royal service, one that acknowledged that even princesses face the same fears and challenges as ordinary people, and that surviving them with grace and dignity can be its own form of public service. The farewell that had once threatened to shatter a nation had instead revealed the unbreakable bonds of family love and the remarkable capacity for healing that emerges when people face their deepest fears together. Catherine and William's deeply emotional journey had become a source of inspiration, proving that even fairy tale marriages can weather the most devastating storms and emerge not just intact, but stronger than before.